Welcome back to Quack Fab. In today's episode, we are going to modify Frank's lower control arms to be more airbag friendly, and we are going to relocate the front shocks because I disliked how much steering angle was limited by the first attempt at shock relocation. It really kept me awake because my brain wanted to find a better solution.
So in today's video, I'm going to do two things. One of them is I'm going to cut here all the way through the frame and then box it in so that I could scoot that shock in and over. That way it'll let this turn in more. Also, these control arms are not really made for airbags, and I don't like how far down the bottom of that one is. So I'm going to put a 1/4-inch plate across the top and cut the bottom one off, probably just to bolt the plate directly to the thing instead of having this weird wedge-shaped spacer at the bottom. Another thing, I also realized that this sway bar mount right here is contacting this lower ball joint, and that's limiting my upward. I was wondering, it's like nothing was hitting. I finally found it. So I'm going to chop that off too, see if I can't get any more upward motion.
Most of this episode's audio is going to be voiceover because it was hot in the garage and I had my barrel fan on. First thing I did was remove the spindle and hub. Next, I removed the airbag. And finally, I removed the lower control arm. Since my shock tabs were only tacked in place, I knocked them off with a hammer. I then proceeded to cut the sway bar link stand off the control arm. These are DJM 4-inch lowering control arms. That sway bar bracket that welded on didn't have any penetration on the inboard weld. The outboard weld had good penetration, so back to cutting and grinding for me. A little gentle persuasion with a hammer and the bracket comes off. Now that the brackets are removed, I needed to clean up the remainder and clean off the powder coating so I can get a good weld when I make my airbag plate. Now it's time for some CAD, cardboard aided design. I laid the cardboard under the control arm, traced the perimeter, cut out my design, then checked the fit against the control arm. I had my son bring me a jug of ice water. Gotta stay hydrated. I got my pattern traced onto some 1/4-inch steel plate, then used my plasma cutter with a steel ruler to guide it. This could be cut out with a cutoff wheel, but this 1/4-inch plate is scrap from a company in Cincinnati that used to up-armor Humvees. So it's a lot easier to plasma cut it than it is to ride the struggle bus with the cutoff wheel. Ta-da! Now that I have my plate cut out, I test fit it to the control arm. Seems like we have some more powder coat to remove. Yay me, more grinding. I also needed to remove some weld from the edge of the ball joint plate, so my plate could butt closer to it. Now I turn my attention to the 1/4-inch plate to clean up the surface rust from the areas I'm going to weld, and also put a nice bevel in the edge that butts up against the ball joint plate. Got to get that deep penetration. With everything cleaned up and fitting nicely, it's time to throw down some welds. I weld a little bit on each corner before I go ham on it. Once I get the corner secured, I typically weld in about 3-inch sections, then move to the other side. This reduces warping and mines the duty cycle of my welder. Because I'm using flux core wire, I also clean the slag off the previous weld with a wire brush before I overlap it. Now that the airbag plate is securely in place, I turn my attention to re-relocating the front shock. To do this, I am cutting a section out of the frame so I can recess the shock into it and gain more room for better steering angle. At least I hope. Fingers crossed. With a recess cut into the frame and enough time has passed to allow the control arm to cool off, I threw the control arm back on. Well, sort of not really threw it on. I wrestled with it for about 20 minutes before I emerged victorious. Once I got the control arm in place, I realized the new plate was making contact with the frame and preventing me from laying it out completely. My camera overheated and shut off, so I didn't get the footage of me cutting the corner off the plate to allow full range of motion, but you can see it in the upper right. You can also see that I traced around the airbag and made a center dot that I can blast through with my plasma cutter. As I stated earlier, this is armor plate, so trying to drill through it is a chore. That is why I blow through it with the plasma torch, then I clean it up the hole with my die grinder. Now that I have a hole in the airbag plate, I can bolt the airbag back into place, and then I can put the spindle and hub back on. And then connect the tie rod back to the spindle. Now that all the parts are back on, I turn my attention back to re-relocating the shock. I put the shock into place and decided I needed some more clearance. Then I sit there and stare at it for a while and contemplate the meaning of life. Now that I'm done contemplating and deciding all is well, it is time to tack the shock tabs on again. I then cycle the suspension up and down a couple times to verify that I like the travel and I have clearance on all sides. I then bolt the shock to the upper mount to prepare it for positioning. I have the suspension cycled all the way up, and I push the shock all the way down to verify that it is not going to jam the shock at full compression. I then put some hardy tacks in the upper shock mount to hold it in place. Now that everything is tacked into place, I cycle the suspension again to ensure nothing is binding and there is still enough clearance. And here you can see that I was successful in regaining a lot of my steering angle. Now this I am happy with. All I got to do now is box in the frame and do it all over again on the passenger side. But that is going to happen behind the scenes. I am hot, sweaty, and tired, not necessarily in that order. Thanks for watching Quack Fab. If you like the sped up cutting, grinding, and welding, or if you would like more detail, drop a comment below and let me know. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'm going to get a shower.